Hello and welcome to AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I'm your host, John S. Today we meet Willow F. from Seattle, Washington, who this month, December 2016, is celebrating 28 years of sobriety. Willow got sober as a young person in AA and created a new life as a person in recovery, a life that she lives fully, with a passion for creative expression and a sincere wish to give back in service to others. Hello, Willow. Thank you for agreeing to be here on AA Beyond Belief, the podcast.
Hi, John. It's great to be here.
It's good to see you, or not see you, but talk to you.
Yeah, you too.
After meeting you in Austin and having a podcast with you earlier with Ben and Vic and me and you, we're talking about our experience there. And thought it would be fun to have you back. Why don't we start, Willow? What we usually do here is just have the person tell their AA story, and then we let that evolve into a natural conversation. So, you want to go ahead and start with what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, and just take it from there?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So in my my story is kind of long, so I was trying to make it a little bit more succinct.
Okay.
Thinking a little bit about it before we started, but
sure.
I'll kind of start and preface things with, I got sober very young. It was about a week before my 15th birthday.
Oh, okay.
And this month is actually my birthday month. So on December 26th, I'll have 28 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's very weird to say that sometimes,
I know.
but it's great. So kind of where it started for me, I was raised in a pretty liberal environment.
Mm-hmm.
My parents came from different backgrounds, but by the time they were together with me, kind of a little bit of partying and free living was a part of their lives, and a bit of the way that they were. My dad was a musician while I grew up, and I had my first drink at about 2 years old.
Oh, wow.
My dad was having a very intense conversation with one of his friends, and they were tasked with watching me while we were on we call it a family camp out, but it
Mm-hmm.
lasted 3 months. I think we were actually homeless, but but it was fun for us. But so I crawled up and took a huge mug of beer that he had sitting on the table and drank the entire thing. And him and his friend didnwe notice, and
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely loved it.
Wow.
It's a funny story that gets told in my family that, when my mom came back, we had an air mattress in a tent, and I was literally bouncing off the tent walls and just happy and loving it. And I think that, there's a lot of talk about if alcoholism and addiction is environmental, mm-hmm. or is it hereditary, or, just a chemical imbalance or that kind of thing. I don't know, but I probably qualify on all levels for it. I was kind of set up for it. And so growing up, it wasn't, I didn't necessarily drink freely growing up, but my parents smoked pot, and
mm-hmm.
And it was a common thing in our family to just pass it around, even with the kids.
Oh, wow.
So I couldn't tell you when the first time I smoked pot was. They blew it in my face when I was young, because mm-hmm. I was, pretty excitable, and, they were kind of mellow and, needed me to calm down, and that was effective. And, I was probably holding it myself as soon as I was able to.
Wow.
It's just something that was kind of common, and it wasn't, I don't know. I didn't see it as a bad thing then. And I still kind of don't now,
mm-hmm.
It sounds bad, but, not that I would recommend it to anybody, but
mm-hmm.
it was just what they knew,
Sure.
They were just doing what they knew. And so that was kind of all throughout my childhood. And when I was around 11,
mm-hmm.
My parents actually got involved with a marijuana growing operation.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived in a house that had a grow room underneath. And as a result of that, and the people that we were around and what we had going on, my older brother, who was working with them on it, he ended up getting murdered when I was 13 years old in relation to that. And so that was a really, at that kind of developmental stage for me,
Sure.
And that really shattered our family. It was, super traumatic for everyone involved. And we actually had to us and many other people that were involved had to kind of run from where we were because the person that did it had an address book and was possibly looking for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And we were up here in the Northwest when that happened. And we ended up going to Southern California, which is where my mom's family was from.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the process of sort of trying to just survive through that, all of us, my mom and my dad and I were kind of the family unit at that time. I have my brother that was killed was from my mom's first marriage, and
Mm-hmm.
I have 4 other siblings from my dad's first marriage. But none of them were living right with us at that
Right.
time. So the 3 of us went to California and kind of all just started a snowball of our own addiction, just
Mm-hmm.
dealing with the things that were going on and not being able to talk to each other. There was a lot of hurt and blame for my parents with each other and with
Mhm.
themselves. And, we didn't have the skills to be supportive to each other. We were just really broken.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we got to Southern California and I got into school down there, into high school. And I just, I looked for the party scene. At first, I don't know that I realized this, but I was really just trying to numb, this traumatic event that had happened to me. And, so I gravitated toward people that partied and that ditched and, went and hung out with adults in the area and, had no interest in really being in school. I was pretty smart and I would learn stuff if I heard it. But I had absolutely no desire to really participate in those things that you were supposed to do in life. I did not care at all. And so as a result, I was expelled from high school in 1988 in March.
Okay.
So that was 10th grade. And they expelled me because they had me on a watch list. I'd been busted, doing smoking pot at school and running
Mhm.
away. I didn't drink necessarily at school, but that was, when I was out of school, that was hand in hand, with the party scene,
Yeah.
Whiskey, tequila, beer, whatever, anything I can get my hands on, right? Because at that age, I wasn't procuring my own
Mhm.
substances, but anything somebody had and I could get my hand around
Yep.
went in, and all of it usually went in, no matter what the consequences of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up, like I say, expelled from school. At some point in there, I was thinking about this today. It's so long ago, and so much of that is blurry. Sometimes it's kind of like an after-school special that I watched. But I don't really remember how this happened, but I ended up running away or leaving home. I went and lived in a house with some drug dealers, and they supplied us with, a lot of them were into meth, and that was around, and, we kind of had a trade-off deal, but I would usually take their drugs, and then I would go, walk around the streets with my friend. Basically, we would walk around and wait for somebody to pull up beside us and say, "Hey, you girls want to party?"
Mm-hmm.
And then we would get in the car with them and go do whatever you would do in that circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
So I put myself in these just crazy, dangerous, chaotic situations constantly.
Right.
And I think, of course, I didn't realize this at the time, but when I look back on it now, I really think that it was a method of choosing my own chaos and danger rather
Mm-hmm.
than the chaos and danger that other people had put me in.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
It's because I just, everything that I did, and the drugs and the drinking, all of it, I did as much as possible, as fast as possible, to get as high as possible.
Yeah.
Like every time. And I didn't really have a concept of not doing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't. When I think about it, I still don't. I mean, I know that other people think about it differently, but
Mm-hmm.
I still don't understand why you would have a glass of wine.
Right.
It doesn't, like, it is alcohol so that you will get drunk, and
Right.
why get drunk if not totally drunk?
Uh-huh.
I get that other people don't think that way, but that's why I know that I'm somebody who
Mhm.
needs to drink. But yeah, so I continued down that road, doing all that crazy stuff. Luckily, really bad things didn't happen to me, but I think that it's because I was willing to do really bad things too.
Mhm.
I didn't resist taking the bad road, so nobody had to force me down a bad road, to kind of say it subtly. But, and I ended up, at 15 years old, I was 5'10" and 90 pounds. I was an absolute mess. My parents, I was not living there away from them, and they were, because of what they had already been through, it was tearing them up to see me going through that, but they didn't really know what to do. They didn't have, they still weren't well, from their own trauma. But at some point they came and found me where I was. Or no, well, I guess I had kind of a really weird, bad come down thing, and I called them and asked to come home. I think that's sort of where it started. And when I came home, I ended up going and doing a bunch of shoplifting and getting busted with a bunch of drug paraphernalia on me. And they basically said, get her to rehab or she's going to go to juvie. So my parents got me into a rehab facility. And when I first was there, I didn't, like I said, I had never even thought about not living the way that I was living. My role models at that time, there's this woman, she probably wasn't even 30. Her name was Moxie. And she was a dealer, and I thought she was super cool. And she looked like she was 50. And she I don't know if she lived long, but she didn't look like, she was
going to go.
And I wanted to be like her. That was my goal. I didn't have hopes and dreams. I didn't look at life past my 20s.
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily suicidal, but I certainly wasn't really interested in what life had to offer either. So I just didn't have much to look forward to. So when I first went into the rehab, that was the first introduction that I had to the idea that there was another way to be. And at first I wasn't really interested in it. Although I did, I kind of listened to a little bit. I was like, oh yeah, they've got a point. Okay, I should probably not do meth anymore. That's pretty bad. And, but smoking pot and drinking is, that's what is life without that?
Right.
And, and, I ended up getting kicked out of that rehab because I wasn't, we were supposed to do some work with the steps, things like that. And I wasn't doing those things. And, I think I was there maybe 2 months or maybe 3 months. And then got kicked out. I feel like it was over that summer. It's also really weird that time frame seems like it was so long when it was happening, probably because my life was still so short at that time. But it was really, really, really fast.
Yeah.
My trip to the bottom was on a rocket ship is what I feel like.
No, I can relate to that actually, because that's exactly how I felt. I was 25 when I stopped drinking, when I got to AA. And so it was all through my high school years and my early 20s when my drinking was really bad. And when I look back on it now, that was a really relatively short period of my life. But it seemed at the time it was a long haul. Yeah. And when I got to AA, people kept telling me, oh, you're so lucky to be here so young. But I didn't feel young, and I didn't feel very lucky.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, I heard that too. I heard that. I still hear that, and I feel that now. But at that time, no, I didn't. I guess I still felt young, but I did not feel lucky at all.
No, and I cringe when I hear people say that every once in a while. They'll look at someone come in, oh, you're so fortunate, or so, it's like, come on, please.
You don't know my whole story, Yeah. But yeah, so I went back, I had to go, after that summer was over, I had to go back to school. And because I had been expelled, I was only allowed to be at the alternative school, which is where all the party kids were.
Oh, great.
I kind of tried to stay sober, but, the people that I gravitated towards were the people that I knew. And I remember they had a meeting in my school, and there's this guy that led it. But then I decided to go to a party and try to be there sober with some other friends. And I saw this guy there partying up like crazy. And that was kind of a turning point. I was like, oh, these people are all totally full of shit. Fuck this, Yeah. So off I went, on another binge, and, again, with my parents not being able to find me, and went and, was kind of living with a friend and just running around doing the crazy stuff. And they just, I don't know, I think it was probably a couple of weeks before Christmas, they came and found me. My dad was really adamant. He was, I'm taking you to jail, or you're going into rehab, and that's it. And, I ended up, I was scared. And so I got in the car with them and I went. Some of the counselors from the first rehab center I was in had opened a new center on their own. And so I ended up going there. I sort of knew the people. I knew a couple of the other patients from before. And I remember sitting on the step outside that place with one of the guys in there. And, something, because one of the things that had happened after I went back out is all this stuff, the first intro that I got with meetings and, recovery stuff, I was so young. I was like, I am not like these people. I'm not. I am not an old alcoholic. None of this really applies to me. But you still hear all the stuff in the back of your mind. And, I thought that now I knew better and I could limit myself and all of this. And basically going back out proved everything right and showed me exactly how much like those people I was.
Sure.
There's that old phrase about a, head full of AA and a belly full of alcohol, is a bad mix. And it really is true. Once you get that seed planted, it's kind of hard to deny it.
Yeah.
So while I was back out, I remember I had this experience where, and this was Christmas Day, which was the last day that I drank. We'd been at my grandparents' house, and I went in and I snuck my grandfather's Thunderbird wine out of the refrigerator a few times. And then that night we went back home, and I ended up going to hang out with a friend of mine who also bought Thunderbird wine, which was really weird. That's like the epitome of alcoholic drinking, right? Something I had never had before, but that's actually the last thing I ever drank. So I was drinking that with these people, and they kind of didn't want me around, and I was just lonely and desperate and sad, and that awful feeling that we have in the pit of our stomachs about how our life is when we're in the middle of the addiction. And I went outside and was standing there, and I had, for a long time I described this as my white light experience. But I had, what I thought of as a voice from outside say to me, you don't have to live like this anymore if you don't want to. And I really heard it,
Really? It was like a real voice?
Well, I mean, I really heard it, but I mean, like inside, like,
okay.
Like it did sound, and of course, as I kind of played along with traditional AA, the more I told that story, the more it was.
Sure.
I don't talking to me.
It was God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But now I know it was probably either me talking to myself or remembering something I had heard. But it really, whatever it was, right? The thought hit home.
Yeah.
And I really understood and knew in my heart that I did not have to live like that anymore if I didn't want to. And so when I went back into our rehab, after that, I remember sitting there with one of the guys and saying, well, I'm going to give this 30 days of really trying. But then, if it doesn't really make a difference after that, then forget about it. And I have no idea, I didn't even notice when 30 days came because I poured myself into it. We had to do a really thorough first step. I think my first step was like 40 pages of writing and, really showing how you were powerless. And I did commit myself to doing the things that they did in there. And at the same time, even when I went into that first rehab, they also got my parents into meetings and into
that's good.
When my parents first brought me in and they were like, oh, our daughter's all messed up. You got to fix her. And they were like, okay, well, we're going to take her over here. And why don't you two come talk to us? So we all went into recovery at the same time at that point.
Wow.
And I really started to take it seriously. And that's, that night, I left that apartment after I had that little experience. And that was the last time I ever drank. And I just started getting involved. The rehab that I was in was outpatient, so I did it like 5 days a week. I wasn't allowed back in school anymore, so I ended up going to adult ed and doing my proficiency exam. That was, like I said, that was a week before my 16th birthday. And so in California, you can't take the GED that young, but you can take the California high school proficiency. At 16, and it's the test is a little bit harder, but I just needed to be done with school. And so I did that, and I got that taken care of. Got my driver's license and just entered the world. I started working. Like I said, that outpatient rehab, I was there for about 6 months, and so we were there 5 days a week. And when I wasn't there, I was going to meetings or hanging out at AA halls or AA dances. And I made it my whole entire life. I didn't know I didn't know how else to exist.
Yeah.
I had no other examples anywhere.
And was that down in Southern California then when you were starting out?
Yeah, around like Corona,
Okay.
Corona area, Riverside.
Mm-hmm.
Was,
and how long were you down there?
So I was there until I guess it was about 3 years. So when I was 19, I ended up. I had met a guy down there, and we dated for a while. We broke up, and he moved up here to the Seattle area where his parents were. And then he came back and asked if I would move up here with him. And he was, a guy in recovery also. And I did. I had to. My parents ended up divorced in that first year, and still a lot of trauma around that. My mom ended up with someone who she had met in the program, but was not someone who could stay sober, and was really violent with her.
Oh.
And when I was 17, I ended up moving out of her house to go couch surf with friends, and ended up getting my own apartment and stuff like that. But I got kind of launched out because I couldn't stay. She wasn't safe, and I couldn't fix it.
Right.
I and he weren't safe in that situation.
Yeah.
Something really bad was going to happen, and
yeah.
I couldn't make her change. So I just had to get out. So I just kind of launched me into the world, and she, left him a couple of times, and I was living back with her at one point when this boyfriend came and asked if I would move up here, and it was, I think half of it was for that opportunity, and half of it was to come back to the Northwest. Like,
yeah.
I never really loved Southern California. I was born and raised in Oregon, and so the Northwest always felt more like home to me. And Seattle was a big city. It seemed like a really great opportunity. So I did it. I jumped in with both feet, and I had, while I was down there, I had a really great network within AA of young people that were, super fun and did a lot of activities, and we had a really great time. There was like 3 meetings a week that were probably across a 75-mile span that we all kind of migrated back and forth through, and it was really amazing. And so it was kind of hard to leave that, but that was the only thing that I didn't want to leave. It was a little hard to leave my mom, but I was ready. And when I got up here to the Seattle area, it was a little bit hard to, break in and build a network, but, slowly I did. I got some pretty good friends and just, started living my adult life, and, went to a fair number of meetings, was pretty involved with traditional AA.
Right.
The God stuff wasn't really that big of a deal to me for a long time, because it, at one point really early on, I didn't have any religious history.
Right.
My family so much. And so when they said, oh, you got to believe in something, you need a higher power of some sort. I had initially made my brother that had been killed, using him as my higher power very early on. But while I was in rehab, I realized that there was some inappropriate behavior from him to me when I was younger. And so that kind of, you can't really use that as your higher power anymore. And I sort of didn't know what to do with that. And I remember being in a midnight meditation meeting once, a candlelight meeting, and they did a guided meditation, and you were walking on a beach, and a being, you saw a being of some sort up further, and it became more and more clear to you, and then you saw really what it was, and then you spoke to it. And I remember I was really into the meditation when it was happening, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna see my higher power, but I couldn't, the light, like there was this bright light, and it was supposed to solidify, right? And the light never solidified for me, and I was so frustrated while I was meditating. And then again, I had this thing that I chalked up to being my spiritual experience, where I heard it say, you don't have to see me, you just need to know I'm there. And I was like, oh, great. And that was, for years, that was enough. I didn't really have to question it anymore. And anytime somebody questioned the fact that I may or may not have fully believed, or if it came, it's like, oh, well, here was my experience. So, and I just played along like that. And my understanding was that was absolutely necessary in order to find recovery. And I wanted to be in recovery. Everything that happened in my life, I chalked up to the only reason I was there to enjoy it and have it was that I was in recovery. Yeah. So if that was a requirement, I had to have it.
Wow. I relate to you so well. And I think probably because I was fairly young, although I was 10 years older than you. And I've been in AA the same amount of time as you, that AA was just, it was all I knew. And everything that I started out with zero when I was getting sober, nothing.
Yeah.
And so everything that I had, I could attribute to AA and being sober. It was, it was everything. And like you, there was a traumatic event in my family that tore my family apart, and it had to do with my mother's suicide. And it totally tore my family apart. And like you, I started drinking very, very young. And during my 20s, I was drunk probably every other day, and putting myself in those situations. When I got sober, there were plenty of young people around my age. I was in my 20s, and there were other guys in their 20s that we hung out together, and it was just home. I didn't have any problem with the God stuff so much, but for me, I played along with it. I went along. I said, well, I'm like you. I didn't have any religious background, but I thought, okay, I got to do this in some way. There's got to be some psychological benefit to doing this. But I was talking the talk so much that I think I kind of believed my own stuff after a while. But anyway, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, that's fine. And that's one of the things that I love, that I've loved about listening to your podcast, is that I felt the same way. Your story has really resonated with me too.
Yeah.
So,
I wonder if it has to do with because we were so young,
starting
out, because we didn't really have much, we didn't have anything when we started,
Yeah. Yep. Nothing. I had nothing to go on. I didn't even know how to be. I talk about this sometimes when I share that, because they talk about, take what you need and leave the rest behind. That's my entire personality and persona was built on that. Like, I didn't know. I remember having kind of an identity crisis early on there, because I only knew Willow as a stoner partier chick.
Right.
I was not anything else besides that.
Right.
And so I just started looking at other people and how they were and what they were, and taking little pieces of them to build my person, So yeah, and that sustained me for a really long time. It wasn't, I had a few experiences where, I went to both NA and AA meetings for a long time. They were really interchangeable to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that alcohol is a drug.
Yeah. And they say that in NA too, don't they?
Yeah. The difference between the I don't know, controversy that comes up about, drug addicts in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and stuff like that is just such bullshit to me, because
I agree.
Alcohol is a drug. We are all addicts. It doesn't, and that core feeling, right? That core desperate, horrible feeling that we have is the same for all of us.
Yeah.
And core principles of recovery are the same for all of us.
And the two go hand in hand. This is what's so crazy. Who was I talking to about this? I can't remember anyway, it might've been Richard. But yeah, it was Richard H. We were talking, and we said, yeah, but almost every drug addict that comes into AA, they're also drinking copious amounts of alcohol.
Absolutely. They're totally hand in hand. There are some alcoholics that don't do drugs.
Yeah, but not that many anymore.
Not the other way around. Yeah, not really. But yeah, so things were great for a long time, and the status quo was a-okay. And then in 2000, so I had about 12 years sober at that point. I was still living up here in Seattle, and the guy I moved up here with, we had broken up a while before, and I had some friends that I knew from recovery who had decided kind of at the last minute to go to Burning Man one summer.
Oh, cool.
And that was in 1999. And they came back from that, and they had these amazing stories of just the crazy cool stuff that they had seen there. And these guys were all we all snowboarded together, and were into kind of extreme sports, and they were skaters, snowboarders, mountain bikers, stuff like that. And so they had gone and done this extreme thing just because it was extreme, and they were all sober. And they just talked about how amazing it was and how cool it was. And I was like, we are going next year. We're doing this. And so in 2000, I went and did that. And that was, I don't know how much you know about Burning Man, but a lot of people have the concept that it's just a huge party,
right,
which that is a piece of what it is. But it's also a whole lot more. And what I found through that, which I had been kind of missing in my sort of small life that was just work and AA meetings, was that people doing really amazing creative things. There's Burning Man has a set of principles itself. It's called the 10 Principles, which I have, let's see, I pulled, they really kind of go hand in hand with AA principles when you think about them. So they are radical inclusion, gifting, decommodification, radical self-reliance, radical self-expression, communal effort, civic responsibility, leaving no trace, participation, and immediacy. Excuse me, immediacy. And you can look up, they have kind of an explanation of each one of those, what it means kind of to the community as a whole. But what I found there was this whole community of people that lived on a set of principles that were pretty similar to the things that I resonated most with in AA. Because I went with some people who also didn't drink and stuff, I was solid in that part. I was pretty solid in my recovery by that time. And then these people also just created the most amazing art and experiences and kind of temporary utopian society. And I'd never experienced anything like that before. I'd never, I always felt like I had the potential to be a little bit creative, but I'd never really tapped into any of that before. And so, through that, I found the ability to do that. I started, after I came back, I went and found somebody to teach me how to do fire dancing and ended up performing as a fire dancer, which is a really fun and cool thing to do. And through that community, I found a bunch of people that also, because a lot of people that do that, of course, when you're playing with fire, you don't want to be inebriated, right?
There you go.
My sobriety was a really great benefit to that.
Yeah.
Most of the people, while we were practicing or performing or things like that, they were also sober. So I could, relate well with them. And even when they did party around me, I still, I'd come to care about them. And they were such an accepting and engaged and smart, funny community that it didn't matter that they partied and I didn't. And never once have I had anybody try to make me party with them either. Like, they love that I can drive.
Yeah, there you go.
And stuff like that. I'm the sober friend. And but that experience really opened up my whole world. And another interesting thing that happened is and I've heard you talk about this a few times before. One of the things that AA gives us is access to a community.
Right.
And and those are, that churches are one of the only other places that I think that tends to happen. Sometimes there's other ways that build up community, but there needs to be some common focus, I think, for a community to build around. And we don't have access to very many of those. And so my only source for community for a long time had been AA. But I found that a lot of people were really kind of stuck in the same old there. Yeah. And as I had more and more time sober, just hearing about everybody's problems with alcohol was not very life enriching to me anymore.
Right.
So as I started to discover this other community, I also started kind of falling away from AA. And when I look at it now, I think that part of that was because I felt like if I talked about the fact that I was doing this stuff in an AA meeting, that I would get a lot of shit for it.
Oh, okay.
You couldn't, it's like hanging out in a bar. You can't do that.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't want to have to defend this amazing thing that was happening in my life.
Sure.
But I didn't feel, it wasn't something that was putting me on the edge in my recovery. It was just expanding my life experience in just the most amazing ways.
Yep.
And so that continued.
And that's what AA is supposed to do for us. We're not supposed to hide out in AA. We're supposed to be part of the world.
It says that in there somewhere.
Yeah, it does, I think.
So
So if you're out there, if you don't see somebody in a meeting, maybe it's because they've gone back to college or
exactly,
they're
exactly,
doing
which
something.
I'd never really thought of before. I thought if you didn't see them in meetings, they must be drunk or dead.
Yeah, because I did that. I was like in my 30s and I went back to college, and when I was doing that, I wasn't going to as many meetings. And maybe there were some people back in my own home group that I wasn't doing very well.
Yeah,
But I was
yeah.
actually meeting new people and learning new things. So
Yeah.
anyway.
So, and then, and I met my current husband, like a year and a half after that. And, he's not in recovery. He's a normie. And so, meetings were no longer a date.
Mhm.
And after a few years, I realized that I was going entire years without going to any meetings at all.
Mhm.
And I started to, for a while I've been like, that doesn't seem right.
Mhm.
We're told that that's how, that that's the beginning of the end.
Mhm.
And, I don't know if that's always true or not, but I definitely don't want to find out.
Right.
I still feel like my entire life, and the reason that it is the awesome life that it is,
Right.
an attribute to my recovery.
Mhm.
And, I've had people say, oh, you were so young, that was just a phase, da, da, da. But like I said earlier, I know that I still, if I consider alcohol or drugs, I don't think about them in a reasonable way,
Yeah.
So going back to that is not an option. And that, you hear stories about how that mental twist happens just out of the blue.
Mhm.
And it happens because people, get too far away from recovery. So I started to be really conscious of the fact that I didn't want that to be the case for me, So I had started trying to find ways to kind of blend my program back into the rest of my life, but not give up these amazing things that are
Sure.
part of my life either. Because I really don't think that that's necessary.
No.
And kind of reaching out, there is at Burning Man, there are sober camps of
Mhm.
people to go. And I went 8 times to Burning Man. I only went to a meeting finally the last time that I went, which
Mhm.
was weird. And because I always knew about them, but I was doing other stuff,
Right.
that was way more fun.
Yeah.
But even trying to link back into that community there, it's pretty dispersed, and I didn't quite make the connections that I was seeking.
Right.
I sort of reached out and tried, but it was a little bit hard. And so coming back home, I was like, gosh, how do I blend these two things together? And I started, going to a meeting, once a week or, 2 or 3 times a month. I found a meeting near my house, and, just trying to reintegrate myself. And what I realized is that, I'd been away from AA, for quite a while, but then I was sober for so long that I wasn't like a newcomer coming back.
Right.
So people, I think when you're new to meetings, people really embrace you and pull you into the
Right.
community. And,
Right.
and so I wasn't really getting that.
Right.
And I also, there's some commonalities that weren't there anymore. And this whole other part of my life is not really something that I can bring a lot of other AA people
Uh-huh.
to join in. And so it's been kind of hard to reintegrate
Okay.
that. But I'm working on it. Another thing that happened along that same time is I started paying attention to the news of the world,
Uh,
which, because of my AA principles, I had not for a long time, right? I didn't need to fight anyone. I didn't need to think, or,
right.
it
Okay.
made sense to me for a while to not be engaged in some of that stuff. But,
Gotcha.
now being an adult and being someone with a little bit of maybe skills to offer,
Uh-huh.
that I've been able to develop in my time since I've been sober, I started paying attention to what was going on, listening to NPR, stuff like that, and thinking about that stuff. And that's when, so much of the negative things that we hear happening are kind of related to religion,
Right.
and disagreements over gods.
Right.
And as I started thinking about that, it became more and more clear to me that I thought that was a problem, that someone should do something about it, that it's such a big problem that not any one of us can do anything about it. And the only thing that I could do anything about was my own position, my own message, and being really clear on what what I think and believe and what my own truth is.
Right.
And it didn't take very long for me to come to the fact that I knew and always knew that I'm actually atheist.
Sure.
I played the agnostic card for a long, because it felt like what was right. And I was told that I had to believe in something in order to have access to this amazing life.
And in AA, it seems like it's easier to say you're agnostic. If you're an agnostic, there's still hope for you.
Right,
if you're an atheist,
you'll come around.
If you're an atheist, it's like you're shutting off. It's like, oh.
Yeah. So as I got more clear on that, and then I was like, oh shit, what is my place in AA? Can I even be in AA anymore?
Oh yeah.
If I'm an atheist? And so then I thought about it a little bit. I'm like, well, I'm sure that I can. I need to rewrite the steps for myself or something.
You're telling my story, man. That's exactly what I was going through.
I know. I've heard it. So I started thinking about doing that. And then I was like, wait a minute, I bet that I don't have to invent this wheel. I bet there are others like me that have gone through this. So I started searching the web, and I ended up finding, I found a couple of things here and there. One of the main things I ended up finding was locally there's a meetup group called Atheists and Sobriety.
Okay. And
I was like, well, let me go check that out. And there was just a couple of people there. But through that small group, I met Tom L., who ended up starting the first Many Paths meeting down here in Burien.
Oh, cool.
And a couple of other people that were, they were in AA also, but they couldn't really find a place to talk about their atheism in AA, so they had this separate meetup group. And, Tom had been researching this a little more. He came into AA, with that type of belief. And I just found, it just snowballed. People gave me a few resources. I found your website, the AA Agnostica, that kind of thing. It snowballed, and I just found more and more and more information. And this was the end of 2015, I guess. Okay. Yeah. And we a few of us ended up going to the one-day conference in Olympia. Yeah. And so that was February of 16, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think so. So at that, so the Friday night, the conference itself was on Saturday, and I got there early. The Friday night, we'd kind of done a meet and greet, and then I was back up in my room, kind of getting ready for the next day, and I decided to listen to one of your podcasts. And I can't remember which one it was. I should probably go look back and look at it. But that was, you talked a fair amount about your story in there. And it was a really good conversation. And that was, I had a super, it was almost like that same spiritual experience that you feel like you have when you first come to AA and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. Yeah. And it was very moving. And I had that experience listening to that podcast because I realized I wasn't alone. There were a lot of people having the same experience that I was, that it was really important. I and those people needed to be able to find each other. Yeah. And that there were things starting to happen that were going to make that possible, and that I was be able to be a part of them. Yeah. And I probably cried through about the second half of that podcast.
Wow.
Because of that. But it was really amazing. And that then the day at that conference and seeing, 70 people in the room all talking about this stuff was so exciting. And I actually, I knew that day that I was in the middle of an extremely pivotal day in my entire life.
Interesting.
Which I don't know how often you get a chance to really be aware of that. But I was on that day, and that
is so interesting. Your story parallels mine. I had that experience in Santa Monica. It was like, I knew that was a moment that was changing me forever in AA. Yeah. Yeah.
That was so cool to be aware of. And it has. I mean, that is absolutely proven to be true. And I'm still somewhat on the path of realizing my own truth. That's starting to solidify and be pretty clear for me. What I want to do with that truth is a little more questionable. How to apply it, because I had the experience, because I was playing along with traditional AA. Right. The experience of praying and things like that. Those practices were helpful to me. It's very important to me to use different language now and to not do the play along part anymore.
Yeah.
But I still really want to find ways to integrate those practices into my life.
True.
Because it makes no sense not to tap into them, right?
Yeah,
I know that I'm just talking to myself, though.
Exactly. It does make sense, because I actually did the same thing. I don't do the praying anymore, but there was a long time that I did. I'd always start my day on my knees. It's hard to believe I did this, but I used to do this. I start my day. There's nothing wrong with it, but I just don't do it now. But I was getting something out of it. Of course, there is no God listening to me or giving me any empower or anything. But I was centering myself. I was taking some time to be quiet and reflect and just kind of get myself centered and remind myself what's important. That's what I was actually doing.
Yeah.
I was praying to a God that I didn't know what I was doing, but the actual action that I was doing was that. So yeah, there's some value to that. And I could see going to a meeting and say, you know what? No God, I don't talk to God, but I do this.
And I really, as I think more and more about, what do I really think about this? What I believe is that I believe that we are extremely powerful, each of us individually.
Yeah.
For good and for bad. And I think that the only things that exist in this world are nature, right? And nature is just science, and there's no divine plan for it, right? It's just science and evolution, and the things that happen in nature, they happen, and nobody has any control over them.
Right.
And it's chaos, and that's okay.
Right.
Then there are people, and the decisions that they make and the actions that they take are the rest of it. And all of the things that happen in this world are attributed to those things. Yeah. And I think that people are, they don't want to believe how much power they have for good or for bad. There's the concept that with great power comes great responsibility.
Good point. Good point.
I think that that's true. I think that to recognize that people are responsible for so many awful things in the world is more than most people can handle.
Yep.
And because of that, it's hard for them to tap into how much amazing things people are responsible for. Anything fantastic that happens that's not chaos is people.
Right.
It's not some God doing it, if someone recovers from something miraculously, quote unquote,
right.
It is because people did something or nature took its course.
Yep.
And that gives us a lot of power. There's so much we can do with that if we recognize it.
Absolutely. It's kind of interesting. At the meeting today, we were talking about responsibility. The reading was from Walk in Dry Places, and we were talking about personal responsibility. And I believe that, we do have responsibility for our own recovery, to take the action that we need to take, to not drink, to be sober, to give something back to the world. And I was thinking to myself, I said, yeah, and I have a real responsibility because, my drinking just wasn't affecting me. It affects other people. I was a drunk driver, and I used to drive around in blackouts, and I'm just really lucky I didn't kill anybody, and someone else is really lucky I didn't kill him. But I can't afford to allow myself to do that, to live like that again, and put people at risk.
Yeah.
But I have the power, like you say, and it's up to me. I can decide to go to meetings. I can decide to stay in recovery. I can, or not.
Yeah, and I also, with that responsibility bit, now that I've kind of come to this realization for myself, I feel a huge responsibility to do what I can to help change AA.
Yeah.
Better. I've heard, I kind of hesitate saying that because that gets people up in arms, like, I actually we had this amazing meeting. It was the first of an agnostic meeting up in another area, and it was new to all these people, and a bunch of different people shared, and there was people with faith and with not faith, and Buddhist, and all kinds of variety all shared how great it was to have a meeting like that. And the very last guy that shared, of course he's the one that stuck with me the whole time. Very last guy that shared was like, I don't know why you think we need to change AA, and I think he said, who are we to change AA?
Right.
And And my answer was, we are AA.
Exactly.
That is what AA was designed to
Exactly.
do.
That's
You know,
exactly how I feel. We are AA. We created
yeah,
AA. I mean, it is our inheritance. It's
yeah,
our responsibility. As it's yeah. There is no outside thing that's AA. It is us, and we
yeah.
make it what we want to make it. And it's gonna change. It's weird that I think that from what I understand of AA history, it's like from the time that you and I got into the program in the 1980s. That's when people started wanting to go back in time and hold on to the past and
Mm.
somehow recreate it into like some magical thing, like it was the best way and only way and good way. And boy, that's not right. That's not what we want to
It's not.
do.
It's so dated. I mean, it was a great foundation,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
it's great that those folks shared their story at the time, but when you really think about it,
hmm,
I mean, it's based on the core of it is based on the language and
yeah,
knowledge of some guys
yeah.
40 years or in the 1940s, right,
Right, right.
with 5 years sober, like just
And I,
5 years.
and I could see how it could kind of work in the 80s in a way, because I mean, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, so I wasn't too far removed from that language.
Mhm.
But now we're talking about the year 2017. It's a
Yeah.
lot. These guys would have been way over 100 years old now if they were still alive, you
And I
know.
mean, I think the reason that the core principles still work is that basic human behavior is the same,
Yeah, you're right.
and that those things tie into that. But we know so much more
Yeah.
about psychology and science,
Yeah.
and we communicate in such different ways now than we did then.
Hmm.
That it really needs to evolve, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't,
So when
yeah.
you were going to meetings in Seattle, you were going to traditional meetings, but when did you start going to agnostic meetings? Because they were always going on up there while you were up there, right?
So there was one that's been going on for kind of a long time
Hmm.
in Seattle proper. It's in a neighborhood called Ballard, which is kind of north of me a ways.
Hmm.
I live in the south end of Seattle, and I had never, and there was a couple of others, but I had never been to any of those. I had never thought about seeking them out.
Yeah.
And so when I started searching, so that was, winter of last year, when I started searching, I did go to that Ballard meeting, and it was all right. It wasn't,
Hmm.
it was good,
Hmm.
but it was kind of pretty similar to most meetings that I'd been to.
Hmm.
And that feeling like I was talking about of just kind of being the same old thing,
Yeah.
hearing the same old stories that
Yeah.
was still there.
Yeah.
And I don't, I wouldn't want to offend any of those folks that were there that,
Hmm.
because it's great that they were doing it, but it
Hmm.
just didn't have quite what I was looking for.
Hmm.
And I think the difference, so like, when I started going to the Many Paths meeting in Burien, Tom had found Josie's book and was reading from that. And there's a difference. It's kind of more than just questioning the God part.
Right.
There's a willingness to let everything be up for question.
Right.
And one of the things that I've learned in being sober for a long time, I've seen people come and go, and for a long time, like you were saying, if people weren't in meetings anymore, I assumed the worst.
Oh yeah, that's
But sometimes people just don't like AA.
yeah. They got what they needed, and they move on with their life.
They need something different,
Uh-huh.
or and there are so many other ways to recover.
Yeah.
People use churches. People use nothing at all.
Right.
People go back and drink moderately.
And I think some people too, like when you have a crisis, when you're in an alcoholic crisis, this is a horrible, horrible, terrible time in a person's life. And you really, benefit a lot from AA, I think, during that time. And it might be 6 months or a year or whatever till you kind of get through all of that. But I think some people, AA helps them through that time so they can just move on with their lives.
Yeah.
Because I've
And
seen people that were coming to our group for like 6, 7, 8 months, a year or whatever, and they don't come for whatever reason, but I see them and they're happy and fine and doing great.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think that that's the route. I think I need to stay connected to it,
Yeah.
but I've come to understand that we need to allow for whatever path somebody needs to take. And
Right.
it's not cut and dried and black and white, and it's not only our way will work. Our
Right.
way is our way,
Right.
right? We can share that, but that's as far as it goes.
Right.
The way that I did it is the way that I did it. It may or may not work for everyone, but the thing that I do think is important is that shift that I think needs to happen is making more of that okay.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I agree.
not telling people like, oh, well, if I mean, I've had people say like, there's no way you could have hit bottom,
Mm-hmm.
yet. Like I should go and try,
Mm.
and I've heard, and it's been a long time since I've heard this. It was before I questioned the God part that I heard stuff like this from people. But
Mm-hmm.
if people weren't sure about believing, well, you might not be done yet. You might not be ready. You should go.
That is so stupid.
Which is
There's some hard
be a
asses
death
out there.
That can be a death sentence. That
It
is
can be. Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah,
Horrible.
there's some people. I don't know why. I guess they think they're helping people, but I should go to this one group. There's this guy at this group. He has some nickname, some crazy nickname, but he basically tells people to go out and drink if they don't want to believe in God or whatever. It's crazy crap. And anyway,
Yeah. So people like us need to be.
yeah,
And that's the thing that it makes me want to leave and not be a part of AA anymore. But if
Yeah.
I'm not there, right? AA is the most popular
yeah.
recovery resource that it is.
Well,
So
what it is too, those people are so bad for AA because when someone goes to an AA meeting, if they just hear one person say one stupid thing, that's a deal breaker almost. It doesn't take a whole lot. So
But I don't-
anyway,
I don't know that we can stop that, but we
You
can
can't
definitely,
really.
being in the room to tell a different side is
Yeah.
the thing that I can do.
Yeah.
And I don't go to very many traditional meetings, so I'm kind of not doing that thing that I think that
I know. I'm the same way, Willow. I tell you, it's hard. I
It
try to
is.
go to these these things, but they drive me so crazy sometimes. I promise you, I'm gonna try to go to one. I got to do it just to keep
Yeah.
myself fresh in AA, because all
Well,
I
what
know
is-
is the agnostic stuff anymore.
One of the things that I really love is, so like reading from Joe's book, for instance,
Mhm.
there's so many things to talk about, like the tone that it sets in our meetings, for the recovery conversations that we have.
Mhm.
We almost never talk about our experiences with alcohol in our meetings.
Yeah.
We talk about our experiences with recovery. And
Yeah.
I get that the new person might really need to hear about your experiences with alcohol.
Mhm.
There's a lot of traditional meetings where they can find that. But
Yep.
for me, sitting around and talking about that, and I've been in meetings where they have it in their preamble that's what we limit our discussion to.
Oh, I know those silly things. Those are silly. Because really, the bottom line is, in AA mostly, we don't talk about our use that much unless the topic is specifically about that. But usually, I mean, the steps aren't about drinking. The steps are about living.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yep.
my philosophy anyway.
So I think, I'm really, right now, I'm really focused on being of service in that way to AA as a whole.
Mhm.
I've also started, being more of service within my local community, doing some civic stuff
Yeah.
because I can, because my recovery has made me a pretty good person with some access to some skills and some
Yeah.
sensitive ways to deal with things. I think that I can be an asset to my community.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to do that. It's really hard.
Mhm.
I think that's also a reason that I need to make sure that my recovery is in order, because doing that stuff or even getting involved in service within AA,
Mhm.
there's a lot of difficult personalities to be
Yeah,
with.
there are.
I am, if I don't have my own recovery in good order,
That's
I'm
true.
going to become one of those difficult personalities, I think. So
That's oh boy, I love it, but there are some times when I deal with some difficult people. But for the most part, I like my AA friends around here.
Yeah.
Even the traditional ones. Even I don't go to their meetings, but I deal with. I see them. I deal with them. I see them in the district meetings and stuff. Which I think I got one next weekend.
yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important for for that to happen, especially those of us who are kind of, I think of the secular AA thing as kind of a movement. And I've I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, but I really hope that because AA is supposed to be secular, it really
is.
how it was designed, and there's some talk about the name and what we call this movement, that kind of thing, but I really hope that name doesn't need to stick around for a long time, because what we're able to do is just help AA be secular, and it doesn't have to be separate.
I agree. And I tell you, it's so necessary. I had a really interesting experience today. I was talking to this, I did this YouTube channel guy did an interview with me. He's got this YouTube channel called Atheist Lowdown, and he's based in Dallas, Texas. And he wanted to learn about secular AA. So I was talking to him about it, and he told me what his perception of AA was, and he's a total outsider. And his perception of it was a place where they talk about God and Jesus all the time. And they try to get you to find Jesus. I'm like, oh God. That was his, and it's like, I can understand, I guess, why people feel that way, but we got to change that perception. We need to change that. We have a really bad public image if that's what people think about us.
Well, and I think especially if you're somebody who is opposed to that.
Oh yeah.
That's you kind of pick up on that. Well, that's what this is about. It's interesting. I've had a thought. I've had a thought recently. There's a lot of talk about using non-conference approved literature in meetings and stuff like that. And I think most people know that that's not written anywhere.
Yeah, you can use
you can use anything. But I actually think that one of the reasons that people started kind of enforcing that, because the only place that I had seen that kind of pulled out of somebody's pocket was quite a long time ago in a meeting, and someone pulled out their Bible and started quoting. And the person in the room said, hey, only a conference approved literature here. And I think that is actually how
it started.
That concept started, was to keep people from reading from.
It could be.
Sure.
That, because I hear that around
experience.
here, there are people that bring Bibles to meetings at this one particular group, which I find really kind of weird. But that could be. And also, I remember when I was first starting out in AA, one of the most popular books to read at almost every meeting was the 24-Hour book, which was a Hazelden book, but it always had like a prayer in there. It was like real religious. They don't do that anymore. They don't ever use that book anymore. They ended up replacing it Daily Reflections, which is almost equally as religious, but approved by the conference.
Yeah. It's an interesting journey, though. It's and I mean, all in all, my biggest takeaway is I am just so grateful that you and other folks like us, and that people are out there talking about this stuff and making it available. It was such a horrible feeling for me to think that because I was recognizing my own personal truth, that I wasn't going to have access to the recovery community anymore, or at least the AA community, that I had been based in. And so, I think that this stuff is so important, in the conversations and the conventions and the, all the websites and getting the information out there. And there's a lot of, there can be some bickering around it. But just as long as we don't stop. Just gotta keep going. Because it is so important. We had, so the kind of epitome of it was that we had a young girl come to our meeting a few weeks ago, and she shared about halfway through the meeting, and she said, I've been coming to meetings for a little while, and I've never felt comfortable sharing in one before until this. And the other piece of her story was that the next day she was probably going to have to go to jail, because she was there on a court card, and she had gone to a couple of meetings, but she had some major issues with the religious part. Some trauma with that was part of her story. She couldn't handle it, and so she was on a court card and supposed to go to meetings, but she had stopped because she couldn't. She felt in danger in other meetings,
right?
At them, and she found our meeting just the night before she was going to have to go to jail.
Oh wow!
And she came back a little while later, and she's, I actually told her that, I told her about the precedent where somebody had said that AA was actually religious and they couldn't force you to go and that stuff, hoping that she could find some legal help with that. I told her to tell her attorney, but, when she came back, she said, they did use some of that information, and the judge had said, okay, you can go to your counseling sessions and have those count instead.
Good.
So she didn't have to go to AA meetings anymore.
Good for her.
But she came back to ours.
Good.
Because it was the one place that she felt comfortable. And that's the epitome of why what we're doing.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
They're like that can't access AA without a more open approach.
Yep. You're absolutely right. Well, thank you, Willow. This has really been enjoyable.
It's a really great community we're starting, and thank you so much for everything you've done to help promote it. It's really appreciated.
Well, that's it for another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back again next week speaking with Joe C., founder of the first agnostic AA group in Canada, Beyond Belief, meeting in Toronto, Ontario. Until then, you all take care and be well.